What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Coach's Quarters. I am your host, Jacob Meadows, and today we have a treat for you. Big friend of the show, big supporter, and possibly a future component of the actual show itself, a very close friend of mine. I have a Mr. Joey McGinnis waiting to jump on the show. Today we are going to run you through the AFC East. And yep, so without any further ado, please welcome Joey McGinnis. What's up, man? Dude?
Good to be here.
It's going to be a fun time, man. It's going to be cool. Have you ever done anything like this before?
I haven't, but I do feel like I'll be good at this. Obviously, I'm a Dolphins fan, as you know, so I know a little bit about the AFC East. I'm excited to talk about the Dolphins and some other teams here.
Heck yeah, I figured of all the people that I knew, you would probably be the most knowledgeable and the best person to bring on to detail the AFC East, just because you know so much about it as an intimate Dolphins fan who's always at the cellar and has to look at how much better everybody else is.
Well, that's not saying a lot coming from a Texans fan. So.
This is going to be a good one. All right, everybody. Well, we're going to kick off. We're going to start with the Jets, and then from there we will go on to the rest of the teams in the AFC. So with that being said, we're going to jump right in on the content. So talking about the Jets. So this is going to be an interesting year for the Jets. You know, you have Aaron Rodgers coming in from Green Bay, right? And you have a couple of other acquisitions that are coming in. You have Breece Hall coming back from an injury. You have an offensive line that's been a massive question mark all offseason. So, Joey, tell me kind of what you're thinking from a Miami Dolphins fan perspective, kind of where you think the Jets are heading and what maybe they've done right or wrong this offseason in order to potentially leap the Miami Dolphins as the favorites in the AFC East.
Well, as a Dolphins fan, the Jets have been the team that I've looked forward to getting 2 wins against every year. Unfortunately, this year, what they did this past offseason, bringing in Rodgers, Dalvin Cook, I wasn't too upset when the Dolphins didn't sign him, but him going to the Jets does scare me a little bit. He adds a lot to that offense. Rodgers' personality fits well with that team. Him and Sauce Gardner are already good friends. I think him bringing the defense together with the offense is going to do a lot for team chemistry, and it scares me. They look good in the preseason. Rodgers looks comfortable. He looks excited to be there. He's excited to play. And I don't know how long they'll be good for. I think it's good for Zach Wilson to have Rodgers there to mentor him, teach him how to be a pro, because obviously Zach Wilson did not have a good year last year, both on and off the field. But Rodgers is the perfect person to mentor him and teach him, show him what it takes, how to be a pro. And I think they might be set up for possibly the next 5 to 10 years if Rodgers mentors Wilson the way that he should.
It's well said. Yeah, it's even come out. So Sauce has actually come out and spoke to the media a couple times since Rodgers has gotten there and just completely just gushed over him, stating that, you know, he's changing the culture inside and outside of the locker room, and that just his presence, the way he walks into the door, the swagger that he brings every day into the building, that it's enough to ignite the Jets in a way that they haven't necessarily seen since maybe Joe Namath, right? It's been maybe the Mark Sanchez years early on, but it's been a long time since they've felt the way that they feel right now. So Aaron Rodgers' presence has been undeniable in that room. Speaking of like the Jets offense in general, you know, Aaron Rodgers' career, historically speaking, Aaron Rodgers is not very good throwing under pressure. So with their offensive line being as big of a question mark as it is, how do you think that their offensive line is going to hold up when they have, you know, Dwayne Brown got pulled off the PUP list like August 23rd. He just now got back. Elijah Vera Tucker has been hurt on and off. Oh, and Connor McGovern has also been hurt in and out pretty recently. So in terms of that, do you think that potentially their offensive line is going to be able to hold together well enough for Aaron Rodgers to really take off?
Well, injuries do seem to be one of those things that bite teams year in and year out. If you have injuries one year, it does seem that injuries will follow you. They had some injuries last year, but I like what they did this year. They have some depth. Billy Turner came over. He was a former Dolphin, and the Dolphins haven't had a great line in the past, but Billy Turner was one of those guys that when we needed somebody to step in and play, he could step in and play. I like him at depth. Dwayne Brown is solid when he plays. If they can stay healthy, I do like their line. I like that Rodgers has a quick release. I think that's going to help them a lot if him and Garrett Wilson can get a good chemistry going. having time won't be as much of a problem as it might have been in the past with the Packers. He had such a good line with the Packers for so long. But I think they're going to be all right.
It's fair enough. It's also worth noting that Mekhi Becton has looked really, really good in practice. He looked good in the camp, and that was one of their biggest. They spent a high draft pick on Mekhi Becton, so they're really expecting this year for him to return to the form that he was in his freshman year when he almost put up a quote unquote all pro performance. So yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting year for them to say the least, just because they have more potential than they've had in previous years. So it's what they're doing with the hype around them, I guess, because if they can either let it get to their heads and they can crash and burn like the Jets do, or they can take it in stride and potentially win a couple more games than what people are anticipating.
And they are a young team. That's another thing about the Jets.
Yes, they are a young team. That's a good point. Yeah,
I like that Rodgers is going to be able to bring his swagger in as a longtime pro, multi-time MVP, Super Bowl champion. These young players haven't seen anybody like him, and they have the New York media just pumping their heads full. I really think Rodgers is going to be able to step in and kind of teach them all how to be pros and how to win, which scares me.
At least Aaron Rodgers has spoken a couple times, and he stated that this isn't going to be a one-and-done type deal, but at least that Aaron Rodgers is on maybe not the last leg, but the last leg of his career. So you're looking at 3-4 years. If they gel and if they are uber competitive and that they're able to give the rest of the league a run for their money, at least at the max, the Dolphins only have to worry about him for the next 4 at best.
If that. I do feel good about the Dolphins this year. We'll get to that eventually, but of all the teams in the AFC East, I do think the Jets pose the biggest threat to us right now.
That's fair. I'll take that. As a natural Miami hater, I will take that. All right, so taking a look at the other side of the ball, they brought in Carl Lawson from Cincinnati. They have Jermaine Johnson behind him, rookie from last year that looked really, really good. You have Quinnen Williams and Al Woods in the middle, and then Jonathan Franklin Myers, who, again, was a stud last season in limited play. He was hurt at one point, but he looked really, really good last season. Their defensive line looks good. They've reached out. They brought in Jamian Sherwood. They have Zaire Barnes. They have C.J. Mosley at middle linebacker. So that their front seven, this is one of the best front sevens that the Jets have deployed in a long time. So they have to build to beat the other teams in their division, right? So you have Miami, who's got 7 or 8 running backs that are of a starting caliber. You have the Patriots, who are the most efficient team in the league at cycling and running backs as a committee, getting the most out of every single one of them that they can. The Bills don't have a great run game. That's a huge question mark. But it looks like the Jets have really loaded up this front seven full of good run defenders, and then you have a couple of good edge rushers in there. So taking a look at this depth chart, do you see in that front seven alone, before we touch the secondary with the reigning defensive rookie of the year and this, that, and the other, with this front seven, are there any holes that you can just obviously poke into it? What are you seeing with this Jets defensive front seven?
I think injuries are going to be the only thing that can stop this front seven. Last year, their D-line was causing some problems for other offenses before Quinnen Williams went down, obviously. He is a great young player. They just signed him to a big contract extension, and he is excited to be there, and he's ready to play some football, I think. So the addition of Carl Lawson next to Quinnen Williams is going to definitely cause some problems for offenses.
No more double teams. No longer can they just double team Quinnen Williams and expect to get away with it. Now they're going to have that extra guy to worry about. And as just a small addition to that front seven, a guy that I missed, they brought in Solomon Thomas from Las Vegas, who hasn't necessarily been as effective as he was when he was in San Francisco, but he did play a solid rotational role for Vegas last season. So having him in the lineup, being able to work him in and out, just gives them that extra edge of depth. It's not too bad. They're not looking at what could be the worst defensive line in the league. And that secondary now, right? So the reigning defensive rookie of the year, Sauce Gardner, looked amazing all last season. They have Bryce Hall behind him, who is actually a really good cornerback. You have DJ Reed on the other side, who, again, starting cornerback for 31 other teams in the league if he was anywhere else. So you're looking at a secondary that's returning all of these guys that are good. You brought in Jordan Whitehead from Tampa Bay. You have Tony Adams at safety. You have Ashton Davis, who re-upped or came back in order to give them depth at safety. You have Adrian Amos, who came over from Green Bay, who, albeit at the end of his career, but still an effective role player, still a veteran in the locker room, still a voice of leadership to the other players, somebody that can potentially come in and coach the players around him. What are you seeing from the secondary? Because I'm stoked on it. I like, this is my favorite secondary that the Jets have rolled out since Crow and Darrelle Revis were here. So it's like, I'm excited. So
if I was a Jets fan, I think the secondary would be possibly, other than the quarterback, it would be what I was most excited about this team. Sauce Gardner it's only his second year in the league, and he's already one of the best players in the whole NFL. So he's going to definitely he's going to keep quarterbacks up at night. Before they play him, they'll be thinking about Sauce Gardner. It's also good to note they did sign Chuck Clark this offseason, and he went down with an injury at the very beginning of training camp.
Yeah, and it's looking like that's going to be a long-term injury, which is a blow.
Yes, it is. But their safeties, while they're not the flashiest safeties in the league, they do have a solid depth. They have depth. They have good players. DJ Reed's going to be good for him across from Sauce Gardner. I mean, he's going to be matching up against number 2, number 3 receivers. That's big for them.
It's going to be interesting. They do have like you mentioned, they do have a bit of an injury concern there on the secondary. Brandon Eccles got suspended. Jimmy Moreland's on the injured reserve. You have Jarek Bernard-Converse, who's on the PUP list, and then you have Chuck Clark, like you mentioned, that's also on injured reserve. So it's an exciting team. They've brought in a lot of talent. But it does seem, if push were to come to shove, 2 people go down and they will have question marks. So they look good on paper, they look good on the front end, but it's if their depth can come back healthy, it's looking like it'll be a strength of the team. But as we stand right now going into week 1, it is definitely a suspect area on the roster. All right, moving on from the Jets, we are going to go ahead and take a look at the Dolphins. And since you are a massive Dolphins fan, I am basically going to hand over the mic to you. Tell us what to expect from the Dolphins. Tell us what's kind of exciting about the Dolphins, maybe some movement here and there. Give us an idea from a Dolphins perspective of what we are looking at this season outside of, what everybody knows. Give us an idea from your perspective. What are we looking at with the Dolphins this year?
So every year I say, this is our year, I'm excited. And I have never been as excited not just as a Dolphins fan, but as a fan of the NFL in general. I truly believe this could be our year. If we're going to make a run at it at any point in the last 10 years, this is it. Tua needs to stay healthy. The O-line, we got Teron Armstead, who last year when he played, he was great. He did have a few injury problems here and there. Our receivers have had another year to grow with Tua. We just signed Alec Ingold to an extension, made him one of the highest paid fullbacks in the league. And a lot of people, they're hating on that a little bit, saying, he doesn't get used that much. It's not just his usage touching the ball, it's his blocking that is so valuable to us. Our run game relies on the fullback a lot. Protecting Tua, he's going to help so much with that. Our defense, we got Vance Joseph, who... he is going to unlock so many of these young players that we've had. I think we were bottom quarter of the league last year in passing, and we were getting torn up. We got so many good players in the secondary. We got such a good D-line. We finally got a couple linebackers. David Long Jr. came over. Bradley Chubb, he's going to help out. He came in the middle of last year, and he never really had a chance to mesh with the team. I think that with all these players getting a full off season together, with Vance Joseph having a chance to really have so much talent that Vance Joseph had some talent in Denver. Obviously, Bradley Chubb comes over with him from Denver. I think that they're going to be able to hopefully use their past to do great things. I think what you can expect from the Dolphins this year, best case scenario, Super Bowl. Worst case scenario, we have the second toughest strength of schedule in the league. It's going to be tough. We play the Chiefs. We play a couple other tough games. But I really think that maybe worst case scenario is we miss the playoffs by a game or two. It's going to be an exciting year to watch the Dolphins play football.
All right. Nice. Okay. All right, I'm glad that you brought up Alec Ingold. That was something that I definitely wanted to talk about on here. They gave Alec Ingold a 3-year, $17.2 million contract, the richest fullback contract in NFL history. So it's nice to hear that somebody really thinks that it was justifiable because, like you said, it has gotten a lot of hate online. They've been slandering this deal online. And when you look at it in the terms of he's not necessarily a ball carrier or a utility back, but what he brings to the team in terms of pass and run blocking is very understated. And for a team that's brought in Raheem Mostert from the 49ers, you have Devon Achane coming in as a rookie out of Texas A&M. So you have smaller backs who are shiftier. So it requires a fullback that can really get in there and lay that first block so that it opens up that second level of the field. So the value of a fullback that can keep up with a shiftier running back, a fullback that can pick up these blocks, it's very understated, especially with Tua's problems. You have concussion problems with Tua Tagovailoa. So if you have a fullback that can pick up a block in a pinch, somebody that can really seal an edge, it gives an added level of security to the offensive. It's like having an extra offensive lineman that can also carry the ball if he has to. So I am glad that you brought up Alec Ingold. Another thing with that is all the stuff might as well talk about with Tua, all the stuff in the media right now, him going back and forth with Ryan Clark and this, that, and the other. You know, I know you saw this, but the big report of Tua coming out of the offseason, was that he looked jacked. He'd been in the gym all off season, right? He's coming back. He looks good. He's been doing all this different kind of training so that he knows how to fall down, so that he doesn't slap the back of his head on the ground. And Ryan Clark came out and said that, the gym's the one place that Tua hasn't been, completely shifting the narrative from what actually was the initial reports on Tua. Have you seen anything of concern about Tua, or have, for the most part, coming out of camp and from all reports coming out of training camp and the preseason, are you pretty comfortable with where Tua is health-wise?
I'm very comfortable with Tua health-wise. Obviously, the jiu-jitsu training to learn how to fall. We'll see how that works out. I think just him bulking up, he had that really bad hip injury in his last year at Alabama, and he never had a chance to fully recover and just be healthy. I think that's been in the back of his mind every time he gets hit and falls to the ground. It has looked like he's kind of trying to twist his body and avoid landing on his side, and he's landing more on his back, which slams his head into the ground.
That's fair.
So I don't know how much the actual jiu-jitsu training will help him learn to fall, but I think just the confidence in his hip being healthy might play a large factor in him getting less concussions, staying on the field, and doing what he can do. Because he played on an MVP level last year when he was healthy. He put up numbers his game against the Ravens, he had 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. That was something special that, we haven't really gotten to see a whole lot of that, but that was an exciting moment for everyone to kind of realize, like, hey, this might be our guy.
And it would be exciting. It's good for the parity of the NFL if Tua comes out and he's able to stay healthy and he's able to just absolutely sling the rock. And as big of a Dolphin fan or hater as I am, I drafted Tua in one league and I drafted Tyreek Hill in another out of my 3 leagues. So, all faith is on the Dolphins right now. But with that being said, I do have one more question for you in regards to the offense before I kind of try and pedal back to the defense. One of the more dominant pass catchers for the Dolphins when he was on the field these last couple of seasons has been Mike Gesicki. With Mike Gesicki's departure to New England, how do you feel about Durham Smithy and Tyler Kroft taking the bulk of the snaps at tight end for Miami? Because they maybe not relied on the tight end position like other teams do, but Gesicki was active in that offense. How do you think that they are able to overcome Gesicki's departure?
Gesicki was a great athlete for us. He had some of the best hands of any tight end in the league. He made some highlight reel catches in his first few years. Last year, one of the biggest disappointing parts of our team was the fact we didn't utilize Gesicki. I don't think he had a catch in probably 4 or 5 games last year. And he really just never seemed to actually be a focal part of the offense. We never wanted to use him, never tried to use him. And so, unfortunately, seeing him go, while I did love him, it didn't hurt as much as it could have. I really think Durham Smythe, he can block. He's a blocker. That's something Gesicki was never really great at. That might be part of the reason we never utilized him, because in our running game, we do use the tight ends a lot to block. Tyler Kroft is obviously depth, and then we picked up Julian Hill in the draft, which I don't know much about him, but I did hear good things about him being a blocker and a pass catcher. I think I saw something about him priding himself in basically being half an offensive lineman, which is something you love to hear from a tight end.
I mean, he is 6'4". I mean, he's a big dude. So 6'4", 251. So he can be used as a utility tight end at the very least. I mean, he's big enough to eat blocks, and he's slender enough to go for the ball if need be. So yeah, I could see him being like a good depth signing for sure by Miami. Switching gears, moving over to the defense, kind of. You touched on a couple of things like Vance Joseph's come to Miami. He was previously with the Broncos. Vance Joseph brings a completely different defensive scheme with him. He brought Bradley Chubb, or Bradley Chubb was there prior to Vance Joseph's arrival, but he's rejoining with Bradley Chubb, who didn't necessarily get a chance to gel with the team, but didn't put up bad numbers either in the half a season that he played for Miami last year. So you have that. Before I jump in on anybody else, I do have to bring up, just because I know you're a big fan of him, the Christian Wilkins contract situation. You know, he kind of took an L is the wrong way to put it, but he took a running back contract of this season where they gave him a 1-year play on it deal. All of this information is incorrect. So Christian Wilkins had a stand-in standoff with the Dolphins, right, where early on he wasn't reporting with the team and what have you. He has since returned to the team. He's returned to practice and has stated that, you know, he will worry about his contract negotiations after the season is concluded. How do you feel about Christian Wilkins' place on the depth chart? And do you think that if Miami were to look to shop him next season, if that will make it to where they work other defensive linemen in on the interior D-line in order to get a better look at what they might have in the future? Because he's definitely he's a tradable prospect. He's a good player. So what do you kind of feel about the whole Christian Wilkins situation?
Christian Wilkins has been the heart and soul of our defense ever since he joined our team. He's one of the most incredible 300-pound athletes you'll find out there. Something interesting to note is we did just sign our other stud D tackle, Zach Sealer, to a contract extension. And, I mean, there's not a Dolphins fan out there that won't tell you we love Zach Sealer. He's a great player. He's solid, but he's no Christian Wilkins. Christian Wilkins just brings an attitude. He's joking around in the locker room, having fun. You never see him not having fun on the football field. If we were to trade him next offseason, it'd have to be a sign and trade. This is the last year of his rookie contract. It's potential that we sign him to the franchise tag. I mean, we need to get him locked up. He's one of the most important players on our team, not just from his production on the field, but just who he is off the field and what he brings as far as uniting the team and just...
Christian Wilkins has been like you said, he's been the heart of the soul of the Dolphins defense. You know, if you look online, really, it's the only place you're going to find an official depth chart. But if you look online at their official depth chart, Christian Wilkins is actually the only defensive tackle listed on their depth chart. He's the only non-nose tackle interior defensive lineman that they even have listed on their depth chart. So unless they were to bulk up Emmanuel Ogbah, or they were to go out and take a large stab at an early round interior defensive lineman, it is possible that Christian Wilkins does end up, one, like you said, either getting hit with the franchise tag, which for no team, it almost never goes well, right? Normally people don't get tagged and they're not super happy and it ends up with a long-term extension. Normally they get tagged and shipped out of town, right? So, but the way that they have their depth chart set up right now, you know, as long as if Christian Wilkins were to show up and show out, as long as there weren't too much to command too much money, right? It looks like there is a place for him next year unless something drastic happens. So things do look pretty good for him, I suppose. The
only reason that we're not paying him what he wants to be paid like a top D tackle, which he has earned. His pass rushing numbers don't stand up against the top pass rushing defensive tackles in the league. He is one of the most elite run stopping D tackles. But he doesn't get a lot of quarterback hurries. He doesn't get a lot of sacks. In the run game, he's top tier. In the passing game, he's mid-tier at best. And unfortunately, in the league we're in today, you're not going to get paid unless you can get to the quarterback. So that's just something to note. I hope he works on it this offseason and gets to the quarterback this year. That would add a lot to our team, but he needs to step those pass rushing numbers up.
It's fair. It's a valid point. You know, we've actually seen this before. That's very reminiscent of what happened with Jadeveon Clowney. You know, very, very elite against the run, very average against the pass, and he never got that massive payout that he had looked for after leaving Houston. So that's actually a really good point. Pedaling over to the linebackers and the secondary, even as a Miami hater, I love the Miami linebackers and secondary. I'm not a huge fan of Xavier Howard like you may be, but in terms of just overall, Jerome Baker is an absolute dog. I love Jerome Baker, and I really hope that he has a long-term home in Miami. But outside of him, like you mentioned, Brad Chubb, who's going to be a star. Andrew Van Ginkel is really good in depth. I actually really, really appreciate the game that he brings to Miami. You have a rookie coming in Cam Smith that's going to be behind Xavier Howard that actually has looked pretty good early on. You have Javon Holland at free, whom is a stud. Everybody knows the name Javon Holland.
He's an all-pro in the making.
Yeah, very, very good. Young and very good. You have Jalen Phillips, another really young, very prominent defensive player for the Miami Dolphins, who's just as fast as he is strong, and he adds just an extra element. Miami has put together, their defense mirrors their offense, right? They have a lot of, maybe not the biggest guys in the league, but they have a lot of speed and a lot of versatility along their defense, and it is gonna be fun to watch. They brought in Eli Apple after he didn't get re-upped. They have Justin Bethel on their team. Like, it's outside of the young cats, like the veteran depth that they have brought in looks good. I don't know about Brandon Jones, and I'm about to ask you about him because I don't know a ton about Brandon Jones, but I know a lot about Deshaun Elliott. And I love Deshaun Elliott both for Baltimore and for Detroit. So I think bringing him in as a depth piece there on the secondary is going to help them a lot, especially going up against the high-octane passing games that are going to be in the division. But with that said, who is Brandon Jones, and why should I be excited that he is slotted in as their starting strong safety here?
So Brandon Jones, I believe he tore his ACL last year early in the season. I think it's his fourth year on the team this year. He's another one of those young guys that was really starting to step in and make some big plays. They use him a lot to blitz, safety blitzes. They bring him down. He was exciting for us before he went down with an injury. That was one of the more disappointing injuries for us all of last year. Another player you didn't touch on that we should all be excited about is Kader Kohu. He was an undrafted rookie last year, and with all the injuries to our secondary, he was forced to step in and play a lot. And he was actually one of the top cornerbacks in all the NFL in a lot of statistical categories. For an undrafted player to come in and play as much as he did, he definitely earned. He got a bonus this past offseason from the NFL for his draft position and his production on the field. He was a great player for us, and I think that having an offseason to know that he's that guy, he's our second-string cornerback now, it's going to do a lot for his confidence and a lot for our team.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this after every team that we get through in this division, and then once more at the very end for a cumulative response. But out of the two teams that we've gone through so far, the Jets and the Dolphins, who do you project will take the number one role, just out of the two that we've already talked about?
Obviously, my heart tells me the Dolphins, but my brain is telling me this might be the Jets' year. So
Hard Knocks would tell you that it's the Jets' year as well this year.
I don't think we should ever trust what Hard Knocks tells us, though. Historically speaking, Hard Knocks has not had great teams on there.
That is accurate. Moving forward from the Jets, third team that we are going to cover of this division is going to be the New England Patriots. This is a team that I was calling a sleeper all offseason. I'm not necessarily kicking myself for that quite yet, but it does kind of feel like they're trying to tank for whatever reason for the first time ever in the Bill Belichick era. There's no information to back that up whatsoever, but God bless if they had a terrible camp. But you're looking at a team that is lacking depth at wide receiver, despite having they have a couple of names, right? Tyquan Thornton's on the injured PUP list. I think he's on the PUP list. That's for the first 4 games he'll be out. Devontae Parker is battling an injury. He was somebody that they brought over from Miami. Devontae Parker is a good wide receiver, but he only averages like 8 games a year anyways.
He's a great receiver when healthy.
Yeah, he's a stud. He's a massive red zone threat. He's just, he can never be in the red zone because he's always on the sideline. So that's a problem. You have Kendrick Bourne coming over from San Francisco, who was kind of an afterthought in the San Francisco offense, which means he's not necessarily the most explosive guy. His 40 time's not very great. He is a strong receiver who can block, And that's great, but you also need receivers who can catch the ball because that's what receivers do. And in terms of catching ability, they have Juju, whom they brought in from Kansas City, and Juju's been a pretty average receiver his entire career against the cap. They're the most exciting receiver on their roster right now outside of Tyquan Thornton, who again is already hurt, is Demario Douglas, the rookie. And it's not an inspiring group. They have a decent offensive line on paper, right? You bring in Riley Reef from Chicago. You have Micah Winwu, who is a returning offensive lineman, who's one of the best offensive linemen in the AFC, individually speaking. David Andrews at center, whom is actually pretty good, but they faults in his game. He's still young. You have Cole Strange, who's a return left guard from last season. He was taken out of University of Texas Chattanooga, which not anything against the small schools, because I do believe that star talent come from a small school, but not necessarily the most inspiring person. You do have Trent Brown returning on the left side. Trent Brown's great. Right, he was in New England prior. He's a stud, but that only goes so far. They bring Mike Gesicki in from the Dolphins, as we've already said. They still have Hunter Henry, the carryover from last year, where they tried to deploy Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, and that whole thing blew up in their face after dumping out like $100 million into the duo. Interesting to note for the Patriots roster. Going into the offseason, New England had 3 quarterbacks on their roster. You have Mac Jones, whom everybody knows. And then you had relative unknowns in Malik Cunningham. Yeah, Bailey Zappi and Malik Cunningham. And then, in a very surprising move, both Malik Cunningham and Bailey Zappi were cut and then added to the practice squad. And then New England goes out a couple of days ago and acquires Matt Corral from Carolina and lists him to their official depth chart as the second string quarterback. So do you, in your opinion, what is New England doing if they're not tanking? What is going on here? Because you look at this depth chart, you look at the players that they have assembled for this roster. You look at, what they have in terms of their skill players and their offensive line. What is New England doing?
I don't think anybody can truly know what New England's doing other than Bill Belichick. Obviously, he's a mastermind. Looking at this chart, I think Gesicki could play a good role for him. He might serve as some kind of safety blanket for Mac Jones. Obviously, Mac Jones isn't a big home run hitter. He can throw the ball very accurately, short to mid-range. Looking at the playmakers they have, it seems like it's going to be a lot of running the football this year. They got Ezekiel Elliott they just picked up. He's a few years removed from having any kind of great season. They do have Ramondre Stevenson, who he's looked good.
Yes, dog. Yeah.
He's a great running back, but it's just tough to kind of make any predictions with this roster that they've put together on offense.
It's an interesting look. The one thing I can say, and this, I called Ezekiel Elliott to New England long before they actually signed him, and it's because Ezekiel Elliott is the #1 best pass blocking running back in the NFL. So in terms of New England going out and trying to protect Mac Jones, Zeke was above average pickup in the offseason for the money that they gave him. Zeke, I am sure that they use him in the run game. I am sure that they're going to use him to offset Ramondre Stevenson. However, Zeke does bring an extra element of pass blocking to this offense that New England hasn't had prior. So, to answer my own question, I guess, that what are they doing if not tanking? The one thing that they have done is they brought in Zeke to help protect Matt Jones. They did draft quite a few offensive linemen, slated in at second string. They have 3 rookie offensive linemen. You have Antonio Maffey, Jake Andrews, and Sidney Sow. So they are trying to protect their. I think you're right. I think you take a look at this offense, and it looks like they're going to be built exclusively around the run, like a Baltimore-esque offense without the running quarterback. So it's going to be an interesting year in New England. No longer am I calling them a sleeper in the AFC. No longer do I think that they have Super Bowl aspirations. Tyquan Thornton going down was the nail in the coffin for me, admittedly, because I like Tyquan Thornton. I am riding that train as long as I can. I think that kid can be a star. But the rest of this, it is not awe-inspiring, to say the least. Moving to their defense, in my opinion, there are a couple of massive rookie pickups that they had. Obviously they took Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon with the first pick, or their first pick. He is going to be a star. I really, really liked Christian Gonzalez. But outside of him, Marty Mapu and Keon White. They have a linebacker and they have a defensive end. I think Keon White is going to be able to not necessarily start this year. He'll be a good rotational player for Bill behind Dietrich Wise. However, both him and Marty Mapu, who's slated behind Jelani Tavai at the moment, both of them within the next season, I do believe, can take starting roles of the team. You have Josh Uche, who's coming into the last year of his contract there at the outside linebacker, or the weak side linebacker position. Mapu could fill in there very easily. And Keon White, I think they're actually going to, versatility-wise, use him around the defensive line. And we're going to see a lot of him. He might be a starter next season. But from what you have seen coming out of New England camp, what you have seen amongst everybody else, but what you have seen coming out of the preseason games, New England's defense is definitely better than their offense, right?
Yes, New England has always had a solid defense. They don't have a lot of big-name players, but they're just a solid, tough defense to move the ball against. I do like them bringing Jabril Peppers in. Obviously, he's sitting behind Kyle Duggar. Duggar's a solid safety. I think as far as depth goes, that was a great move. I don't hate on their cornerbacks as much as you might. Jack Jones and Jonathan Jones, they're not great players. There is not a bad 3 cornerback set they got going.
No, not at all. And, honestly, I like what they have at secondary. They're not the fastest guys in the world. Almost any of these corners you can plug and play at safety, and they might be a better safety than they are a corner.
That's a good point. Very versatile.
Yeah, but Jonathan Jones was rated pretty high as a nickelback last season. He is good at what he does when he's on the field. He's dealt with injuries. So has everybody else at this point. But their corners, their secondary in general seems to be pretty stacked. Jabril Peppers, I can see Bill bringing in and using in almost a Mark Barron position where it's a hybrid linebacker safety just to get him on the field. But having Adrian Phillips come in, that was a big signing. I think moving Jalen Mills to the safety position outside of making him play corner, I think that's going to play to what Jalen Mills can do a little better. So I like what they have in the secondary. I even like what they have going on at linebacker. Juwan Bentley, I think he's a dog. He's hard hitting. He's really, really good against the run. Can he be a liability against the pass? Sure. But he is good against the run, and Jelani Tavai is better against the pass. So, they work well in tandem. But I do believe that if I were to choose which one's probably going to be on the way out, I would bet that Juwan Bentley, when he comes to the end of his contract, Mapu takes his position and they re-up Jelani Tavai. Classic New England move, and we've got a couple of years before it happens. But most certainly something that could happen. And we didn't even touch on their best player on their defense is Matt Judon. Matt Judon had a little quiet sit-in at practice, so he didn't get fined, but wasn't practicing with the team. Bill Belichick saw it. They broke him off. They gave him the bag. So Matthew Judon at least is going to be inspired to play edge this season. That'll be interesting. It'll be the way that they use him. His hands in the dirt quite a bit, and he does add a level of versatility to the New England defense. The New England defense is good on paper. The New England defense is really good on paper. Their offense isn't, but their defense is good on paper.
There's nothing scary about this team, but it's definitely something. They're solid all around. They're somewhat solid at almost every position. They got, classic Bill Belichick. They got depth. They got trench players. It'll be very interesting to see how the season progresses, but there's nothing that scares me here.
You can't count them out. You can never count out a Bill Belichick team. That's why they're going to go 12-5, and they're going to sweep the Dolphins this season. It's going to be wild.
That's fun to talk about, but we'll see what actually happens here.
And to land the plane, we are coming down to the very final team in the AFC East. We are looking at the Buffalo Bills last. This is a team that we have discussed outside of the pod. Everybody's discussed the Bills. They're, in terms of last season, they're the best returning team in the division. But I'll hand this one off to you. You stated before we hopped on the mic that this may have been the team that added the least. So go kind of dig into that for me. So what about the Bills is leaving you positive or negative, and I'll just circle back and I'll add something to the end.
The Bills kind of seem to be that team that has obviously competed with the Chiefs in the AFC. They've been one of the top dogs through the regular season. And it almost seems like they're kind of content with that. They haven't added anything big to... I mean, the Jets have added a lot. The Dolphins have progressed quite a bit. Can't say much about the Patriots, but the Bills are kind of at that level where I just don't see any additions. They haven't made any big moves. Their receiving core is solid. Outside of the top two, though, there's not much. They got Gabe Davis. They got Stephon Diggs. They did draft Dalton Kincaid, who could add something to that offense. Their running backs are solid, but their running game is really what they've been missing the last 4 or 5 years. Ever since Josh Allen got there, he hasn't had a running game, which, I mean, to his credit, he has still done quite a bit with that offense. He's a great quarterback, but he's showed last year he's turnover prone, and it's just tough for me to see them making the playoffs this year. I hate to say it because they've shown flashes of being one of those top dogs in the AFC, but this year it just really seems like they've kind of stayed right where they were last year, which wasn't good enough.
It's an interesting take and an unpopular opinion, but one that I probably share with you. Last year, interesting enough, you noted that Josh Allen was turnover prone last season, and oddly enough, the one factor that changed that led to that was Brian Daboll defecting to the Giants. And after Brian Daboll left, Josh Allen seemed to revert back to what he was earlier in his career, where he pushed the ball too much downfield and he forced too many things that he probably shouldn't have been forcing. And you combine that with, like you said, his top 2 receivers are solid. You have Gabe Davis that's taking over that second wide receiver role. He was in the third wide receiver role last season. Gabe Davis has been solid, and I do enjoy watching him play. Stephon Diggs is a star, but when you have Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, and Deontay Hardy behind them, it's not a group that really inspires a lot of confidence. And with a quarterback who has notoriously been bad about forcing passes into places that they shouldn't be, trying to make things happen that can't happen, giving him a receiving core that's not necessarily a standout core in terms of being able to make something out of nothing, it does almost seem like a recipe for disaster for Buffalo. And that you couple that with, their running back depth is good. The actual depth, on paper, the depth is good. You have James Cook, who's a relative unknown. He did great with the limited carries that he got last season. He was one of the more efficient running backs on the ground through and through, and the limited amount of carries that he got. And you bring in Damian Harris from New England, who was a switch hitter. He's good. He's a very good pass catcher, and he's able to run, between the tackles, between the guards. He's better in space. And then behind him, you have Latavius Murray, who's bounced around a little bit, played in Minnesota, played for New Orleans, played for Denver. But Murray's been really good as a placement filler. But the names listed, it's not... Like you said, Buffalo's missed that consistent run game. They had Devin Singletary, who defected to the Texans. They had Zach Moss, who defected. And when they had Singletary and Moss in there, the one thing it felt like they were missing was a consistent run game. They found themselves in a lot of third and mediums, which is not what any team wants. And you bring in this team this year, who has James Cook, again, who did well with what he was given last season, but we have yet to see him on a full-scale slate. This is his first time being the lead back on the depth chart. And even supplanting him with Damian Harris and Latavius Murray, I don't know if Buffalo's going to have a consistent enough run game to keep up with the lack of just overall targets they have in the passing game. So it's an interesting take that they could potentially miss the playoffs, because of all the teams in this division, not including the Patriots, who on paper don't look like they even deserve a shot at a title. But of the other 3 teams in the division, Buffalo does actually look like they may have taken a step back, and they could be ceding the title over to Miami or the Jets and allowing whoever was that second best team to take a wild card position, which would be wild after Buffalo has been a top-notch competitor for the last couple of years. And the big narrative has been Patrick Mahomes v. Josh Allen. It's the next greatest thing. So it'd be crazy to see, like in the old Sheriff versus Tom Brady, right? It'd be wild to see Josh Allen fall off going into the year that he's going, where Patrick Mahomes is still on the top of the world. And you see that rivalry dissipate overnight because the Bills weren't able to build an offense around Josh Allen that could sustain the greatness of Josh Allen. And it's always worth noting that Brian Daboll leaving could be the catalyst to this. Once he left, it'd be wild to watch, and it'd be sad for Brandon Beane, but it'd be wild to watch if this team really did fall out of contention exclusively because Brian Daboll left. So something to monitor.
Note about that. Yeah. Brian Daboll leaving, going to coach Daniel Jones, a very, very turnover-prone player. Last year took a big step forward and didn't turn the ball over near as much. So
most efficient season as a passer for Daniel Jones.
Crazy, yeah.
So it's definitely something to monitor, just in terms of like seeing what Josh Allen's going to be able to do in year 2 without Daboll. One other note, something that we didn't touch on. We didn't touch on the offensive line too much. The Bills are starting a rookie, so I did not realize this until a little later into the preseason. But Osiris Torrance has won the starting right guard role over Alec Anderson. So not only does he have an uninspiring group of wide receivers, not only does he have an aged running back group behind James Cook, but a lead back that's relatively unknown. They're also starting a rookie offensive lineman amongst a relatively mishmash group of offensive linemen in general. You did note that they brought in Dalton Kincaid. That was their first-round pick. Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid could bring a pretty nasty 1-2. But again, even if there's Josh Allen's throwing to the tight ends, those are going to be mostly dink and dunk. I know Dalton Kincaid can get upfield and create separation. But a rookie tight end, historically speaking, is not a large contributor to an offense.
The tight end pick was interesting to me, seeing as the other needs that they had. And, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're in a win-now mode, but Stephon Diggs is getting a little older. Your running backs have not been productive. Your defense, we'll get there, but they have lost some players there. It was just an interesting pick to me because, a receiver or a running back would have been a much better fit there for me.
I have to agree, but I think they're in win now mode. I think that's the problem here, right? Like their window might shut. Like they've got 1 or 2 years. Last year you had a lot of issues with Stephon Diggs along the sideline there at the end of the season. Josh Allen throws those interceptions. Season ends, painstakingly. And there was a question mark about Stephon Diggs. There were trade requests going into the offseason. Maybe not something that actually came to fruition with the Bills, but there was trade speculation amongst all of the fans. So it's going to be interesting to watch and kind of see what they're able to do, because if they have a bad year, you're looking at potentially losing the star of that offense, sans Josh Allen, which would spell disaster for the Buffalo squad.
It would have to be a rebuild at that point because Stephon Diggs would want out. Josh Allen did just sign that big contract extension, but once Stephon Diggs is gone, he has no weapons. The reason Stephon Diggs was brought in was to help Josh Allen advance and progress in his career because he was struggling without weapons. And with his weapon getting older and wanting to win a Super Bowl now, it would be interesting to see what direction this team went.
Exactly. And then looking at the other side of the ball, again, kind of like the Patriots, the Bills have always been built on a strong defense and a capable offense. Their defense does look good. You have Greg Rousseau and Leonard Floyd along the defensive or edge rush as edge rushers. I like Leonard Floyd. Was he great for the Rams? Not necessarily. Was he great for the Jets? Not necessarily. Greg Rousseau's been a star, but you don't really know what you have in Leonard Floyd. It'll be an interesting to watch. You have AJ Espinosa, who the Bills did spend a pretty high draft pick on. He was a first-round pick, if I'm not mistaken. He may have been a second. But it's interesting that he's already been slated to second string on the depth chart, meaning that he possibly didn't develop as much as they were hoping. So it boils down to maybe a skill gap, right? Shaq Lawson's really good depth at the other edge rusher role behind Greg Rousseau. I do like Shaq Lawson. So that's good. Their edge rushers are okay. Their interior defensive line, you have Daquan Jones. Ed Oliver's a stud. Shout out to the Houston Cougars. Tim Settle's good. But does it matter, right? Because it's all going to boil down to them being able to score points at the end of the day. Their linebacking group leaves a little bit to be desired, right? Matt Milano's getting old. He's good. I love Matt Milano. I loved Matt Milano a decade ago, right? And that's your big issue, is you can love Matt Milano for an entire decade, and at the end of it, he's not going to be as fresh. He's not going to be as good as he was in his younger years. So honestly, that's probably their biggest deficiency on defense, is going to be their linebacking core. They're older, they're slow, and they look like they might end up being a liability. Trey White's a year older. He's coming off of a couple of different injuries at cornerback. Is he good? Yeah, Trey White's a stud. But you're going to see kind of a downturn almost reminiscent of what you got with Stephon Gilmore. And this is why Stephon Gilmore ended up having to leave Buffalo as well. They get hurt and it's a revival somewhere else, but they get hurt and their play drops off in Buffalo. They are returning Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. That's huge, right? The safety tandem is very, very good.
One of the best safety tandems in the NFL when healthy.
Right.
They are both on the wrong side of 30 now and getting older.
Correct. So as good as they may be, Father Time loses no battles, right? Eventually we all succumb to it. Every player succumbs to it. So it's Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde are good. And DeMar Hamlin's a feel-good story, right? Shout out to DeMar Hamlin for making the 53-man roster. He died on the field. I saw the soul leave his body, and then boom, back, right? So he makes the 53-man. That's terrific. Taylor Rapp ends up coming over from the Rams. That's terrific. It's good depth. But they have aged starters. And then you take a look at the cornerback situation opposite of Trey White. You have Kerry Lamb, who is good, right? High draft pick a couple of years ago, but hasn't necessarily developed into the corner that they wanted him to be. And Taron Johnson in the nickel, I have nothing bad to say against Taron Johnson. Taron Johnson's very good. He's an incredible nickel back. But it's behind them, though, not a whole lot of inspiration. So it's an interesting look. Their starters are decent. They're getting older. But it doesn't look like the Bills are necessarily built to make a run anymore. And if they do, it'll be momentum-based at best. Right? Because in terms of raw talent, I wouldn't put them above the Jets or the Dolphins. How about you?
A couple years ago, this was a roster that would have put fear into people. I think a lot of people are looking at this roster now and thinking, we're not scared. The Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, it's not a great matchup anymore, which is sad to say because it really did have the makings of one of those Tom Brady, Peyton Manning-esque rivalries that we could see for the next 10 years. But this is the same roster from 2 years ago. There's not much that's changed here, and it's just something that doesn't give me a lot of hope if I was a Bills fan.
From the outside looking in, it's one of those deals where you look at the top of the AFC, you look at the Chiefs, right? They've had the crown for the last couple of years. You look at them and you look at, even though you've had roster turnover with the Chiefs, you see them going and filling holes that truly needed to be filled so that they could continue competing and making it work in the positions that they lost in a way that it's sustainable. And then you take a look at the Bills roster and the turnover that they've had there, and you don't necessarily get the same thing from it. It's almost like, the Bills lose players that they need. The Bills lose these big difference makers, and they are not necessarily good at immediately replacing them. Their development seems to take a little longer than some other teams, and they're not necessarily marketable to the big name free agents that aren't named Von Miller, who did end up going there. But they're not a big landing spot for the big name free agents, which is, it kind of goes into what you were saying about them not having any solid offseason acquisitions. So it's the Bills look like they could be poised to take a massive step back, which would be huge for the NFL because it's a giant falling. But with that being said, that's going to wrap up this show. This has been the AFC East. And we will see you back. I'm hoping that friend of the show, Joey, will make another stop the show. We're hoping to get another episode filmed for you guys this weekend. So hopefully he is a return, because I know you guys don't necessarily like listening to me talk to myself in a closet all day or the entire show. It's nice having somebody to, go back and forth with and banter with. So with that being said, thank y'all very much for tuning in to The Coach's Quarters this week. I am Jacob. This has been my good friend, Mr. Joey McGinnis, and we will see y'all very, very soon. Peace.